listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV and movies about unruly female teens.
Still true.
I got nothing for this one.
No, that continues to be true.
Yeah, it is a running theme.
There is an off-screen haircut.
Yes, there's still haircuts.
That would probably have been significant if we'd gotten to see it. I'm going to bet, before we get into it,
it was filmed.
It was, and was probably would have been very significant if we'd seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the big thing with this movie and the reason that it has an afterlife, A, is the Times Square of it all, but also is the clearly lesbian, themes in this movie that were taken out.
Yeah. Apparently, this movie was, I started to say explicitly, and I mean that in terms of, intentionally present, written, filmed.
Mm-hmm.
This was supposed to be a queer love story of some kind, and was taken out, as opposed to what has been the case in many of the movies. I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, isn't it strange? It's not strange. It says a lot about the time period that you grew up in and the time period that I grew up in.
Yeah.
That how many have we had any movies that are overtly, explicitly queer on our show hosted by two queer women?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, they're all things that, and this, God, 2 minutes in, we're going back to the dissertation that we found. We got to have that. She's now a librarian. We've got to have her on at some point.
I would love that.
Yeah. We should reach out to her. She seems cool. I followed her on Twitter.
I love that.
But that whole dissertation, and this, for people who are just joining us for the first or second time, you may not know any idea what I'm talking about.
Because Times Square is your favorite movie.
Yeah, right.
And you've got a Google alert set for it.
You never know. You never know. I'm sure there's, hey, this movie was cited by Kathleen Hanna and was listed as a precursor to the Riot Girls movement.
It is this movie's a bigger deal in the way that Empire Records was a smaller deal than I realized. This movie is a bigger deal.
So for those of you just joining us because Times Square is your favorite movie of all time.
I'm Andrea.
Oh, shit. And I'm Jody.
There we go.
So many episodes ago when we were watching, maybe it was Legend of Billie Jean, we found a dissertation about the sort of queer undertones in these movies from this time period. And I will find it and tell you exactly what it is because it keeps coming up.
I should just keep a permanent link to it in our, not even in our episode notes, in our show description.
It's actually still on the desktop of my computer. So it's called, look at us, we're shouting out a dissertation before we do anything else. Unhappy Medium, Filmic Tomboy Narrative and Queer Feminist Spectatorship, a dissertation by Lynn Stahl from 2015. So Lynn Stahl, now a librarian, probably maybe her first podcast shout out, but good for us for finding this. We found it during the search for references to the female, the tomboy in movies, I think during Legend of Billie Jean.
I think that's right.
But the whole reason I'm bringing this up is because your point that you just made is that most of the movies we have talked about have queer subtext that is either intentional or unintentional and has been pulled out by queer viewers. And that's what that dissertation is about. It's about finding that in places it may not have been necessarily outright intended. In this case, it was outright intended and then removed.
So
Allan Moyle has said, in the DVD commentary, this was supposed to be a lesbian love story. Mm-hmm. Although he has also said it's not gay, it's pre-gay. It's two young people falling in love. My idea was that if they were older, they would be gay, because we have to point out these are young teens.
Right.
This is a 13 and a 16-year-old.
And Allan Moyle, I guess, is kind of confusing, romantic attraction and sexuality. And he's a little mixed up there because they are gay.
Right.
Even if they are not engaging in gay sexual activity, which is, I think, what he's trying to say.
Yeah, his determination is a little weird there.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is this is not a movie about two young people who have sex, which is good. I'm glad that he's clarifying that there wasn't, that what was cut from this movie wasn't,
Explicit lesbian sex. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
between teenagers. Let's not do that.
I assumed as much, but I understand him maybe wanting to clarify that. Yeah. But they are not, I should say, pre-gay is very funny.
Yeah, I know. It's great. It's great. Yeah, and that's not that many years ago. The Blu-ray commentary came out it's a Blu-ray. It wasn't that long ago.
Also, we'll get into, I think, for folks who have been listening for a while, this one is maybe going to feel like some of our earlier movie reviews where we were kind of working through the plot and what we thought about them as we went. I know we've gotten slightly more organized. I don't think this movie is going to allow for it because we don't have somebody in the driver's seat, really, since this is new to both of us. So I will say we will get into a kind of summary, though I think we might work through this one a little more organically. Yeah. But one thing I want to say is that I don't think their ages are stated in the movie. I thought they were a little older, but I know than what I'm about to say, which is the actors were only 13 and 15 at the time. So
if we're in the canon of the movie, they are supposed to be that young.
That's so young.
Which is crazy. Because,
my thought was maybe I don't know, 50. I thought they were both somewhere between 16 and maybe. Well, except I knew they were both. Well, don't they say something about Nikki being almost old enough to...
Almost turning 17.
Oh.
Yeah. Which I guess, because in my mind, 18 is when you're legally an adult, but maybe there's something about the juvenile justice system in New York in the 80s. I don't know. But it was 17 that she was turning, and they were trying to have her turn herself in before she was legally more liable, I guess. But yeah, Pammy, is supposed to be, I think, 13 in this movie.
Which means they're better actors than I gave them credit for when I assumed, as I often do, that these were older people playing younger. I think I thought they were 16 and whatever. I don't. Yeah. We've also learned I don't really understand how ages and time and stuff works.
Yeah. No, we've established that.
But I definitely thought the actors were older.
Well, and also I think and again, this could just be me being an old person now and an old person's mindset, but I think young people looked older then.
I think it seems like young people there just weren't young haircuts. Pam she's got hair like Andie MacDowell in Groundhog Day. That's who she looks like to me. That is not a 13-year-old's haircut.
Yeah. Well, and Nikki in the beginning has a punk haircut and then cuts it even shorter. But yeah, I also do think though that in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, young people I guess maybe dressed older earlier or dressed. Maybe it's a subculture thing. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's a subculture thing. It's also a pendulum swing thing because you see on TikTok and stuff, there'll be these people who will it'll be me when I was 13 and you're dressed in a moron. And then it's 13-year-olds today and they're dressed they're out of a fashion magazine. And I know that's not everybody everywhere, but I do think maybe it's a pendulum kind of swinging thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely appeared. If I hadn't read a little bit about this beforehand and knew that they were actually that young, I wouldn't have known that either.
Right, yeah. And I didn't learn that. I watched this before I did any reading on it.
Yeah.
So I just had my little brain, which we know is, again, not always the best at determining ages. So
yeah. Yeah, no, I hadn't done too much reading, but because we had been going down sort of this Allan Moyle rabbit hole, even before we decided to do this movie, when we were researching Pump Up the Volume, I did some reading about Times Square. Also because I'd heard of this movie before, and I don't remember where, but I mean, growing up right outside the city in the 80s, I just feel like it came across my
right
pop culture knowledge at some point that this existed. Should we summarize this quickly for the people that didn't watch it?
Yeah.
Or try to summarize it quickly. We'll see how we do. And this may turn into just a longer conversation, but so the story takes place in late 70s, early 80s New York City. And we'll talk. It's weird. The city is almost its own character in this movie. The city
it's really
is
insightful.
I know. So 2 young girls from opposite sides of the tracks.
We really can't help ourselves.
I know. It's getting silly at this point. I suggested to you in text earlier today that we get somebody to make a word cloud of our podcast and like see how often we're talking about the same shit, even though this is supposed to be just like a selection of movies that meant a lot to us, and we're realizing that it's
enough
the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, how little thought we have put into
this is not
just pulling them thematically.
Yeah,
it's
no,
really
not at all.
Which movies take up the biggest part of my heart is how I have pulled these.
And it turns out
one being one we've never, and I know that like it coming from Allan Moyle, and also he apparently wrote he wrote the story for this one, so that's even more like I understand that some of the themes are going to
be the same.
But it's so funny.
Yeah, but it's not like we just have only done Allan Moyle movies. Like we've also done all these other movies that are the same thing. So 2 teens from opposite ends of the tracks, one the child of a commissioner, possibly, ? And the other a runaway, no idea where her parents are, meet in a psychiatric hospital in Manhattan, where they're being examined for sort of unspecified seizures / mental disorders.
For being unruly or melancholic.
Right.
I feel like, I know 1980 is, we're still, I know, okay, I have 2 disclaimers before I say what I say. I'm prefacing my preface with a preface, so. One
being the most you thing you've ever done.
One being, this is not to say we're doing a great job with mental health in 2023.
No.
So that's the first layer. The second layer is I know 1980 is we're still not doing great with mental health. We weren't then either. However, this feels like it might as well be the fucking bell jar with the like vague sort of like what's wrong with Pam is like.
Can she say Massachusetts? I laughed out loud.
I think she's sad. Like, I think Pam's like ultimate diagnosis is like
she's a zombie, Andrea.
Oh my god, I was just like it's
very melodramatic.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah,
but fine. So they meet at this hospital.
Yeah, they meet at this hospital. Nikki, because she was, I guess, arrested for playing guitar loudly in an alley and then breaking the headlights of some guy's car.
She's a troubled youth.
She's troubled. And Pam, because she like ran out of a press conference, I guess.
Yeah, I get the impression early on that like Nikki actually does have some real mental health issues.
Yeah.
Although I would bet a lot of it is stemming from being part of the system in this way.
Yeah.
Like you don't come out of that.
Basically.
Yeah. And not to say that Pamela isn't dealing with her own stuff, but it is a little bit like overbearing parent being a little too
It's a little early to get into this, but because you just said that, I have to bring up the fact that I couldn't not think about Girl Interrupted.
Yeah.
While watching this movie.
Mm-hmm, totally.
Angelina Jolie's character and Winona Ryder's character.
Totally.
Like the person that's there because they don't quite fit into society and their parents are really uptight versus the sort of like actually more sick, possibly socially abandoned troublemaker,
right? Actually,
violent
in
type.
Need of care, like,
right?
In a way that in need of like professional care. They also mention the second scene. They mention One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a similar, although it's sort of
So they meet in the psych hospital, and then they don't quite understand each other at first, but apparently Pam is like a poet.
It's so funny that Pam's a poet. I don't know why, but it's just like,
she says nothing the whole first part of the movie, and then all of a sudden they read her poem, and it's like she's like a 40-year-old man writing a poem.
Again, very funny that she is 13.
Yeah,
sure.
But so then Nikki decides to run away from the hospital and convinces Pam through the power of the Ramones that she should come with her. And some hand gestures. That's basically it. It's a Ramones song and some signing, and they run away together.
A queer manic pixie dream girl in 1980. This movie could have been perfect if they had You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, like Pam is just so dazzled by
you're so right.
Nikki's, like, you know,
smoking
vibrancy
cigarettes and
that she can't help but follow along.
Her refusal to listen to the man. Exactly. So they run away together in an ambulance. And they run away to what I have figured out through research is most likely approximately 11th Avenue and 14th Street. On the Hudson.
You were able to find them much faster than Pam's dad. Got it.
Yes.
It is funny that they're just kind of, they don't, because it's interesting that it's a runaway movie, but they stay home.
Yeah, like, they're not hiding.
They're not hiding kind of hardly at all. Like, her dad checks in with Nikki from time to time.
They know where they are.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. That was weird. How it was like they ran away, but it was, everyone knew where they were generally.
Yeah. And because
just couldn't
they
make
are
them
minors,
come home.
Like, if her dad really wanted to, he could have had the police come get her and forcibly bring her home.
Right.
Like, he knew. So that is kind of interesting that he kind of lets Pam, because they even have, again, this is later in the movie, but she calls home and he says, like, you know, she kind of like gives him the idea that she is planning on returning home at some point, and he says, like, please make it soon. But he doesn't say, like, I'm gonna come get you. And he after that one instance where he does try, he doesn't really.
No.
It's interesting.
And I mean, so, like, I've read articles that say, like, the 80s is the decade of the runaway. Like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, people running away from home, like, to the city, young women and queer people, like, escaping to places like this. But yeah, it was interesting to me that he didn't try to force her home. So the middle of this movie is a little bit of a mush. They, like, essentially fall in love, play music together. Pam works at a strip club but doesn't take her clothes off.
And
is a very bad dancer.
That's what's so funny about that is that, like, I thought what was going to happen was, because he like, the guy who runs the club, she says, I'm not taking my top off, just good because she is a child.
13.
And he goes along with it. And I thought it was going to be because we're going to find out that she's a great dancer. Like, that it's like, well, fine, because she's again, but I do kind of, it's weird. It is weird. Because I don't like that there's a child dancing at this club, obviously. I'm glad she's keeping her clothes on if she is going to dance.
Yes.
It is sort of interesting that they let her, because she dances like a kid. Like, they don't, she's not, like, weirdly, she's not very sexualized at that club. It's the whole thing is very strange.
I know. And yet there's
by anybody except
Nikki. Yeah.
The way she watches her is, I was like, I think that's when I texted you where I was like, I don't know if this movie is leading to a scene where we're going to see these two girls, like, be, like, where it's going to be on the page that these are two queer girls figuring that out, or if I'm watching a movie where all of that has been cut. And obviously I know now that I've done some reading that it's the latter. But that scene is so clearly somebody falling in love watching somebody else dance.
Yeah. Like, well, and I think when you texted me, I texted you back about how it basically is the Aerosmith video with Liv Tyler and Alicia Silverstone that we brought up. But yeah, it's essentially that type of scene, right? Where Nikki is replacing what would normally be a male character, you know, falling in love with the dancer on stage.
It's so funny to be talking about this stuff knowing that that is supposed to be what it is. Every other movie we've watched, we have said these things and been like, yeah, obviously, like, that's the subtext, or certainly this movie allows for this kind of reading. But this movie, that was the intention. Yeah. I'm so frustrated.
I know. I want to see Allan Moyle's version of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have another character that is a part of the fabric of New York City. Johnny LaGuardia. Great name. Johnny LaGuardia, played by Tim Curry.
Can I say something? Get it mad? I I think I can say that about Tim Curry in just about any movie. He's just like magnetic.
I mean, he's Tim Curry.
Yeah, everybody. I'm not saying anything new, obviously, but he is playing a kind of subdued. I think this is the most like low key I've ever seen Tim Curry.
Definitely,
and it is very interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, and like 2 weeks after we watched Pump Up the Volume, you're like, Hard Harry.
Yeah.
Like, this is what Hard Harry came from.
Like 100%, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that voice in the night. The girls are writing into him to, like, you know, talk about their disaffection and, you know, rejection of society and all of that. And he's, like, encouraging it and sort of... he's encouraging it on air. He's reading their letters. And then sort of mid-movie... he brings them in to play their music live in studio, which is where the incredibly racist song is played, which to me, I was like, Jesus, like it fully took me out of the movie. I was not expecting that.
Yeah. And I think we should take a little bit of time to talk about that song specifically. But I think, it is him bringing them into the station that really kind of catapults them into being like, I almost said urban legends. That's not what I mean. But these like
underground celebrity punk figure type.
Yeah, like Billie Jean.
Like Billie Jean.
Like hard, Harry, happy, hard on, whatever. I'm never going to get it right. It's interesting to parallel that with Johnny LaGuardia is an older person putting these young people, giving them a platform to get their message, whatever that message is, out. And he's using it kind of for his own, in a way, because he has his agenda, which is like paralleled and engaged with their sort of, I guess, agenda. So it's not totally like, I think
it's mildly exploitive,
right? I mean, especially because they are a 13 and 15-year-old to 13 and 15-year-old homeless girls, so that he knows where they are and where they live, and is like probably should be helping to get them into some sort of care, whether that's back with their whatever. But Mark, it's different because he's speaking as that voice in that generation.
He's the disaffected teen himself.
Yeah, there's a little like there is potential for a little like kind of Pied Pipery stuff with Johnny LaGuardia, which doesn't really happen but could.
What would you say his actual agenda is, Johnny LaGuardia?
Well, I think he's trying to keep what's his name, Mr. Pearl. He doesn't want Times Square to be like quote unquote cleaned up, right? He's part of the generation that wants Times Square to stay the way that it is, or not generation, demographic, whatever. And so anything that kind of undermines Pearl's message, for example, his having a runaway daughter, singing obscenities on the radio, is helping his message there.
I think that's right. I think like we can talk more in detail about this, but I think the movie, one of the things that has lived on about it is that it predicted the coming gentrification of the city, and the fight between sort of the gentrifiers and the people that like lived there. And it was not a good place or a safe place in any way, but Times Square now is a whole other I mean, like,
right.
You know,
there's a difference.
There's a big conversation to be had about the
It is a complicated conversation. I don't know that you and I are the two to like really head up this conversation, but I will say there's a big difference between people in a community like working to change things or like asking for support, whatever, and people coming in from outside to quote unquote clean up.
Yep.
Exactly.
An
area so that then those people from the outside can like profit in whatever way. I don't even necessarily mean monetarily, though almost always monetarily.
Oh, yeah.
From said quote unquote cleaning up, which always pushes the people who are already there out and makes things harder for them.
Yeah.
And so
And I mean, I guess we can, since we're not doing a traditional like quick recap kind of thing and then getting into it, we could talk here a little bit about the Times Square piece of this movie. Mm-hmm. If you feel like we can kind of fit it in here. I was really interested to think about the time that this movie was filmed, because the 70s and 80s in New York, especially in Times Square, like there's a lot that went into why it was like that. And again, I'm not a like urban historian. I am not necessarily the right person to talk about this, but just sort of the general overview of the situation. Like in the 80s, there was the crack epidemic, there was the AIDS epidemic, there was austerity measures in New York because the city went bankrupt. Like they stopped funding fire companies, and so fires in the Bronx would like rage out of control because they didn't have a way to fight them. The murder rate in the late 80s and early 90s in New York City was insane. Everyone that's complaining about New York right now and like how, oh, the crime rate's up, go look at a fucking chart. Like I can't even express how much worse it was.
Right.
Like, and Times Square had a heyday before this, but because of the austerity measures, because of, the lack of money in the city, it became what we see in this movie in the late 70s and early 80s. And shortly after this started the quote unquote cleanup that Pam's dad is trying to effect in this movie through Ed Koch and then Giuliani and all of the things that they did to basically resurface all of Times Square. So it's just a really interesting sort of snapshot. I'm going to just put this in the chat.
It's interesting too. We should know, I don't think we said this on mic yet, that this movie was filmed entirely on location, which is very cool. Because when you say snapshot, it's
literally,
snapshot.
Yeah. I just put a link in the chat to the chart that I'm telling people they need to fucking look at if they're going to complain about the crime rate in New York right now.
Look at a chart is such a good, just in general.
Look at a chart.
When in doubt, look at a fucking chart. Yeah.
Yeah. And statistics can lie, but at least try to find some facts. But the crime rate peaked in New York City in 1990 with about 22 to 2,300 murders per year. It has not reached over 500 murders per year in about a decade and a half. Right. It's like the drop was precipitous.
The drop was... Yeah. That's the word I was going to say.
Precipitous, yes. Yes. And a lot of people credit, I don't want to get too political on this, but, a lot of people credit Giuliani for that drop, and I would not simplify it in that way, because...
It is easy to say less murder is better, and Giuliani, sure, obviously there is...
But the drop in the murder rate is not as a result of broken windows policing. I'm sorry.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say about that. That's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, so Ed Koch is the one that brought in all of these renewal policies, business-friendly policies to kind of crack down on the people that were living in Times Square that we see, where it really was all peep shows, strip joints, homeless people, all of that stuff. So yeah, just to say, Times Square is almost like a character in this movie, Andrea.
So wise.
Yeah.
But in a way that is, there are things about this movie that couldn't happen and wouldn't happen and wouldn't be at issue at all if this movie were set anywhere else. So it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie is literally called Times Square. It's not called Two Queer Teens in
Maybe
a City.
It should be. Great title.
Thank you so much.
I do. But this is what I mean about this movie being both sort of incredibly realistic about some things and unrealistic about others, because the vibe in New York City at the time, it looked like this, but a 13 and a 16-year-old girl could not freely romp through Times Square in a way that would feel as like Wizard of Oz as this does.
Wizard of Oz is great. I was also thinking it reminds me of like not the Island of Misfit Toys. What is the island called where the kids in Pinocchio?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't remember.
But there is a whole like Neverland vibe to this, or like oh my god, where's my English degree? What is it called? There is a term for this kind of escape, and I can't think of it, and it'll come to me tomorrow when it doesn't do me any good. Anyway,
but it does. It feels like it almost feels like Times Square is protecting them, or the city itself is protecting them from, you know, Pam's father and all of that finding them.
Because it is the kind of like chaos or whatever of the city that they disappear into over and over again whenever they're close to being discovered.
Yeah. Conveniently ignoring the fact that there would have been a lot of danger for two young teenage girls in the city at that time.
Of course, yeah.
But that's my little diversion about Times Square itself. There's a lot of interesting reading about it. I think actually right now I want to shout this out because I might forget otherwise. There is a writer, a trans writer actually, Jeremiah Moss, who wrote a book called, he writes a blog called Vanishing New York that chronicles all of the places, little small businesses and stuff that have been pushed out, which sounds depressing, but it's also like a celebration of them.
Right.
And he also wrote a book called Vanishing New York, How a Great City Lost Its Soul. And it talks about sort of what he's calling the hyper-gentrification of New York City over time. So I really want to read that book because he seems like he has a very interesting take on it. He also wrote something called Feral City on Finding Liberation in Lockdown New York, and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Transgender Nonfiction. So, and won the Pushcart Prize. Like, I came across this when looking for more information about sort of the evolution of Times Square over time. So Jeremiah Moss is a pseudonym. His real name is Griffin Hansberry. But highly recommend checking out the Vanishing New York blog in particular. Is really fascinating for someone who lived there for most of their 20s. Like, it really feels to me like I'm realizing that everybody that moves to New York from somewhere else will never not have somebody telling them that it was cooler before they got there.
Of course. No matter when.
I moved to New York in 99. And so I missed a lot of the sort of pre-gentrification feel, but I grew up right outside, and I spent a lot of the 80s going into the city and experiencing like the windshield washers and sort of the mess that was the city at that time. So to go back to sort of the plot, I guess, we got lost in the middle because the plot got lost in the middle, you know? They become slightly more famous, it seems. And then they start throwing televisions off buildings, which is a crime.
It's a big crime. And
you could kill people.
You could absolutely kill people. And it shows, that is where you really start to see that Pam and Nikki are not actually cut from the same cloth.
Yep.
Because Nikki is not concerned with, not even the crime of it, but whether or not she might kill somebody.
Yeah, she's fully destructive.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, probably comes from, like, she says, you know, there's a point in the movie where her social worker writes kind of like an open letter.
Yeah.
And she says something about Nikki likely being brought in for manslaughter charges for the death of a friend of hers. And Nikki tells Pam that her friend OD'd. She says the drowning death of a friend.
Right.
And Nikki says her friend OD'd, and she tried to, I don't know if she says freshen her up or something kind of offhand about, like, she throws her in a river, basically.
Yeah.
And so likely that the friend was going to die anyway. But either way, she says, like, people die. Like, she's somebody who death is not like a stranger.
Yeah,
to
she's
her.
seen a lot more
and
of
so
that part of life.
Yeah, and so her like fear of death or worry around death is obviously less than Pam's, who has lived a very sheltered, it seems, life.
Yeah.
So I understand, it's not okay, but I mean, I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a sort of, I don't know. I feel like lots of young teens have sort of destructive tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's the other thing is,
yeah.
I mean, I
would have thrown a television off a building, just not where there were people.
Exactly.
It would be fun to see it smash on the ground, but not when there's people. You find an abandoned lot and you smash stuff,
That was a real hobby of my friend group, was like, we would just collect.
Ours was lighting stuff on fire.
Oh, okay. Well, we graduated.
That was our hobby.
I was an arson. I wasn't. I was always right on the edge. I was always like around other people who were setting things on fire, for example. And then we graduated into, once we could drive, we would like go out on trash night and collect like computer monitors and stuff, and then take them back behind the Barnes and Noble parking lot and destroy things at night.
Yeah.
So I do understand that, but we weren't dropping them off of not high rises, but off of tall buildings in the middle of New York City.
Yeah. And this is where we see Pammy start to kind of be like, whoa, wait, this is a little out of control. I don't know that this is what I signed up for. And, I think it's a little disingenuous in that theoretically she's like working at a strip club at 13. Mm-hmm. So like throwing TVs off of, but it's a plot device to start to divide them and to show the cracks between, Nikki and Pam's different experiences of the world.
Exactly.
And this is when Pam reaches out to her dad again and is like, says Nikki needs me. You start to see it as like Pam is sticking this out because she wants to protect Nikki. Even though she's clearly a little tired of the situation, it seems.
Right. She says like, Nikki still needs me.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
They also do a silly mugging.
This movie, again, like, it is very silly, and the movie does keep reminding you that they are kids. Like,
yeah,
that scene is almost charming.
Yeah. They suddenly have a gun.
Yeah.
And they hold up a guy, but then start laughing, and he gets away. Nikki runs a 3-card Monte game. There's a lot of sort of like frolicking street urchin stuff happening. There's also Tim Curry refers to his listeners as the Truth Squad.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was like reminded me of The Truth is a Virus. From
Oh yeah, there are a few of those like rallying cries too throughout this movie.
Yeah,
like, it's like our fair is fair, like our truth is a virus.
Yeah. And a lot of this communication is happening via newspaper, which is very early 80s.
So fun.
Yeah. But so the sort of like inevitable climax of the movie is the divide of the two of them. Right? Nikki starts to spiral. They have sort of a falling out, but
I'm
not
a little confused about this because it seems
you can
like
hear I am too.
Well, because so the thing that really kind of splits them is Johnny LaGuardia.
Yeah.
Because Nikki gets it in her head that this is what it seems to me. And it's important to remember that a lot of what Allan Moyle intended for this movie was cut.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that Nikki gets it in her head that Pamela, she says, has the hots for Johnny LaGuardia, which is like a young person, insecurity, fine. But then Johnny shows up at Nikki calls Johnny.
Yeah.
And tells him to come to their home. They're
for
like
an exclusive. And
then leaves, and Pam is there.
Yeah.
And Pam doesn't know Johnny's coming. And it's like, Nikki sets it up so, and it is, does Johnny show up with wine?
Yes. Or vodka.
Vodka for a child?
Yeah.
Which is like, I don't get the impression that Johnny is trying to sleep with this kid. That's not what I think is happening. But it is again a little bit like Hiding Out, where it's like, okay, don't show up at a homeless teen's hideout with a bottle of vodka, no matter what your intention is.
That's a good rule to live by.
Let's just not hang out with teenagers.
Yeah.
Like, maybe let's not do that.
It does feel romantic on his end in a way.
Intimate. It feels like there's like some sort of closeness with the two of them. I don't get the impression that like he would have tried to like make a move on. I don't think that. But Nikki orchestrates this in a way, then shows up and is like, oh, isn't this cute? And loses her shit. Yeah. It is a kind of like, she has a sort of paranoia that she like then brings to reality and then is proven right, kind of, but only because she like created the situation.
Not that this is in the text of the movie, but it seems to me also that part of what's driving this is that she knows that Pam's not going to be living this life forever. Right. It doesn't have to live this life forever, like Nikki does.
Right. Totally.
I also would say that I don't think that the sort of intimate romantic vibe is coming at all from Pam or Nikki. It's only coming from Tim Curry's character. Right. Like, they're not enchanted by him in the same way, I don't think. I mean, they're enchanted by him, but not like Pam definitely has a point where she's like, dude, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, she doesn't, again, like Nikki say, like, telling Pam she thinks she has the hots for him doesn't seem to come from any like evidence in the movie. That is all Nikki. Even if she doesn't, I don't even know that she necessarily actually believes it so much as she's looking for something. And
she's losing her shit, and she just like needs an excuse to kind of go crazy.
And she does. Yeah. And she kicks the two of them out, but then she goes to the radio station.
She shows up at the station
and insists that she be let on the air to reach Pam. And it is so sad because early on in the movie, they have this scene where she says, like, if you need me, scream my name, I'll do the same, and we'll promise that we'll find each other. So she does this song over the air, although
he cuts it off.
So Pam doesn't actually hear it. But then he does bring her back to Pam, who he finds sucking her thumb. She's like sleeping in, right? It's that scene where again, so we're reminded that she is an actual child still.
Yeah. And another scene that doesn't exist in the movie, or maybe did and was cut out.
Oh, wait, I misremembered. Go ahead.
A doctor was called that sort of sedates Nikki at the station, and then he goes and gets Pam.
That's right.
And brings her back.
Going on there.
Yeah, Nikki was still there.
That's right.
And so Pam, in this case, kind of breaks Nikki out in a little bit of like a flip of the original premise. You know, she takes Nikki out of the station.
When she's being led to Nikki, and you said, like, it's obviously implied that she's been sedated. I texted you at that point because I thought, and I kind of almost think, I don't know if that would have been it would have been a sadder movie. Well, maybe not. Again, I'm still working out how I feel about this movie because the movie that's referenced at the beginning, which we talked about a little bit, is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Yep. It's the movie that Pam's dad says she asks to go see, and he won't let her, not because of the movie subject matter, but because of its location.
Right.
She says that's not true. Whatever of that isn't true. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
But I thought we were going to get a teen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that Pam was
or a Girl Interrupted.
Or a Girl Interrupted.
Where Angelina Jolie's character is basically numbed.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nested.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But we don't.
No. Which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Although I do imagine that this movie ends at as positive a place for Nikki kind of as it can. Because they break Pam, like you said, in a little reversal, breaks Nikki out.
And they plan a concert.
They plan a rooftop concert.
All the Empire Records.
Do you think Pam is hoping that will sort of snap Nikki out of it? Or do you think Pam thinks this is like a last hurrah, that she knows Nikki is kind of lost and that they are in two different
I think it felt to me, and I don't really know entirely how I feel about this yet, but it felt to me like Pam, knowing that she's going to go back to her previous life and trying and trying to give Nikki what she knows Nikki really wants, which is fame and to be celebrated. And however it ends, but that she wants to give that to Nikki. Mm-hmm. After all of the time of being like, it doesn't matter if we're famous. Like, why do you want to be famous? Finally, she's like, this is what you need. This is what you want. I'm going to try to give it to you. So she and I almost called him Hard Harry. She and Johnny LaGuardia sort of guerrilla advertise this concert on the rooftop of a movie theater in Times Square. And we get our Billie Jean montage of all the young girls dressed in garbage bags with masks painted on their faces to mimic what Nikki has been apparently wearing. I do have a note in the very beginning of my notes being like, is she wearing a trash bag? She was wearing a trash bag.
She was. More as a fashion statement than as a homeless youth statement, though.
Because they magically found trunks of clothing in the warehouse that they could just pull from.
Again, it really is a, like, magical fantasy version of homelessness.
Yeah, the city is providing for them. You know, they find various ways to make money, including washing windshields.
Fuck can't I think of what it's called? It goes back to like fucking Shakespeare. Like when you go out into the woods, you are separate from and therefore not beholden to the societal expectations and pressures, and it is why you can gender bend and you can commute. And then when you return to, once you solve whatever your issue is out in the wild, you can return to the orderly world, and what is amiss in the orderly world will be fixed for you there. It is killing me. That's what's going on here for Pamela. It is why you know Nikki can never be saved, because she doesn't have an orderly world to return to, because she is actually a homeless child who does not fit in with the system, and she has nowhere to return to. And it's why, if you're attuned to that kind of story, you know that Nikki does not get saved in this movie, but Pamela does from about 10 seconds in.
Exactly.
And I cannot think of what it is called. Where are my other English majors? Help me, please.
You'll get it as soon as we stop recording.
I know.
So they are known as the Sleaze Sisters. Which again, early like Riot Girl.
Like Red.
She's not sure she wants to do it. She's still kind of sedated and down and like feeling kind of unsure. So, but she finally caves. She's up on the roof. She says she's throwing a concert to celebrate her escape from mental illness, which is a sentence. And she says to Pam somewhere around here that, you know, she calls her Slick, and she says Slick's going back to school. But yeah, so she sings the song that she wrote.
It's also very funny that she has like
one song.
Oh, we have to talk about when she writes that poem, because she thinks it's a poem.
Right.
And it's so funny because she's such a teen like boy in that scene, because she like she like reads it to Pam, and then she's like, it's like dog shit, it's whatever. So I don't even know why. I don't even know I did it. And then it's Pam who recognizes that what she's actually written is a song.
Right. No, she's definitely like the dumb teenage boy in this movie.
Yeah. It's so funny. This is like, probably, it's whatever. It's just stupid. I don't even know why I wrote it. It's like, whatever. Dumb. I'll probably just set it on fire, whatever. And then Pam's like, no, you have a beautiful spirit inside of you.
Right.
And so
she
gets to play it again. For everybody, and they fucking love it.
They go nuts.
They go crazy for Nikki.
Yeah. And then at the end, the cops come up to the roof to get her, and instead of letting them take her, she falls backwards off the roof into the loving arms and the what is that? They like a tarp that they set up to catch her.
It's like they knew.
Yeah. And then she runs away.
And she runs away. And it's, you know, I was up until that moment, I was ready for this movie to end with Nikki's death. And I think I even said to you while I was watching it, like, I'm so ready for Nikki to die in this movie.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of, there's that one scene before she's reunited with Pam where she dives into the water, and you don't think she's going to die.
Sorry,
but
I just heard you correct yourself. You can have your accent on this podcast. It's okay.
Thank you. She dives into the water, and she you're not sure in that moment if it's actually a suicide attempt or not. Right. Whatever. I think she's kind of testing herself to see if she actually is, you know what I mean, like chasing death or not. And so there's a version of this movie where she leaps off a building and dies. Mm-hmm. She's been so insistent this whole time that what she needs to save her is fame. Mm-hmm. Pam says, like, why are you worried about that? But it's the recognition. It's the fact that these people are there to see her that does save her. Yeah. And she's able to disappear into the crowd because they are all dressed like
Billie
her.
Jean.
It's a flock of young, exactly.
It's I hate to say this phrase again. It's the Underground Railroad of white girls. Again, I say that very tongue-in-cheek, but we brought this up with Billie Jean, where I really felt like that was what the writers of this movie probably wrote on paper.
In Billie Jean, for sure. They're literally transporting her across state lines, and this is an echo of that, or a pre...
Echo.
It's whatever. It shares that sentiment. And
that's how she disappears, because they're all dressed like her.
And unlike Billie Jean, I don't think that Nikki ends up in Vermont.
No, I don't either.
This is like definitional kind of manic pixie dream girl, because Pam gets to go back to her life having become better, more evolved. Mm-hmm.
Her dad sees her now as an individual
version of herself, and Nikki probably
dies,
goes off to die, or if she's arrested first,
right, ends up in the system. It's not a happy ending.
No,
it's a momentary sort of like flight of freedom that we know is not going to last.
Exactly.
And then we will talk about the music in this movie, but then the one weird musical note in this movie is a song by the Bee Gees at the end. I was like, wait, the last song is disco? What's happening? I found out that the producer of this movie also managed the Bee Gees or something, and just
so it's literally
it's just a vanity thing. He was like, I know these guys.
Very funny.
There's a lot of lore about the creation of this movie and the production that we can get into if we talk about the soundtrack.
Roberts have to.
Yeah.
As much as New York is a character in this movie, I would argue so is the soundtrack.
Would you argue that?
I think I would.
I think you would. Yes, I think I would agree.
It's a great... something we know about Allan Moyle is he is very thoughtful about the music in his movies.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of a hand, you might know more than me.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research.
He had in this soundtrack, but...
Yeah. I mean, it's got Patti Smith. It's got the Pretenders.
Jersey.
It's got Talking Heads. It's got the Ramones. Obviously, it's a big part of it. Lou Reed.
Yeah.
Roxy Music. Suzi Quatro. It's just top to bottom.
Lou Reed and Patti Smith are really interesting ones for this one. When you think, considering that song in the middle that we have so far only mentioned.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to spend a lot of time on it.
I think we need to. It's just incredibly...
But it's doing
upsetting.
that thing that is so annoying, especially now, where they think there's something really interesting. And Patti Smith and Lou Reed are so guilty of this. And Patti Smith, I have complex feelings about, or not complex. I have complicated feelings about. She's a South Jersey artist, and so for that reason, I'm a little forgiving of some of her, and she's also written some incredible songs. Whatever. All that to say, she and Lou Reed are both really famous for thinking they're being really transgressive and transgressive and insightful by using language that is overtly racist, homophobic, to make a point. And that's what the girls think they're doing too. They're because the lyrics, they like say a bunch of slurs and then they say your daughter is one.
Is one too, yeah.
And it's like, well, no.
Not really.
No. And I know that what they think they're saying is like, well, we're part of an oppressed group.
Right.
And therefore we have ownership over all of this language. And you, my father, don't want to admit who your daughter is. And so we can say, but it's like, no, you can't.
No, actually, no.
And you couldn't in 1980.
Yeah. You're not a part of that group. Like, even Nikki, who is an actual homeless child, is still not, a part of most of those groups.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, again, I know people think they're doing something really cool, but it's just not. And in this movie, it is, and their point is for it to be sort of shock value. And I just have very little. Yeah. I just have like very little. I don't care when this movie was made. I just don't think it's ever okay.
No.
And I had to remind you of this, and I just want to remind our listeners, this is such a side note, but Jewel has done the same thing. Pieces of You is a song that does this exact same thing. I just want everyone
Which I did not remember. I just went back and read the lyrics to that song and was like, Jesus.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean, that like probably there was not a big outcry about that scene in 1980.
No, definitely not.
We were still, and in some cases, people are still fine with it today.
It definitely kind of took me out of it. But so, do you want to hear a little bit about the background of the music in the movie?
I would love to.
So the producer, Robert Stigwood, had recently done Saturday Night Fever, and kind of wanted the success of that kind of movie and its soundtrack again. Mm-hmm. So when they were producing this movie, he kept pushing for more and more music. He wanted like a double LP to come out of it because he wanted to make as much money as he could from the soundtrack. But Allan Moyle was kind of like, stop shoving more and more songs into my movie. Like, I need an actual movie to come out of this, not a music video.
Right.
And eventually they fired Allan Moyle and cut, as we brought up earlier, all of the scenes that made it more explicit that this was about a romance between two girls, and just stuffed it with music.
Allan
and like
Moyle has had bad luck with people taking his movies over and doing what they want with them.
He doesn't seem to care what a commercial success is and wants to make his movies. And the people that have the money are like, no, this is a business, sir. Like, I'm going to just, if you don't go along with what we want, like in this movie, we'll just kick you off of it. And it actually took him 10 more years to make another movie after this, because he was like so frustrated
by that. And do you know, I don't remember reading conversations or reading anything about him having that same kind of issue with Pump Up the Volume.
They did. There was some alteration of the original story of Pump Up the Volume to make it more palatable. Like, I think
we did talk about that a little bit.
We talked about how originally
it
was like
degree though.
Yeah, but like his original version of that story was a radio DJ that was his last broadcast, and he was going to kill himself on air.
Right.
And they were like, dude, bit much.
He is very interested in death in a way that is, because even Empire Records deals with it in a much lighter way. But it's
fascinating.
Funny that, Empire Records, they let him. Empire Records, it seems like maybe as a lesson from this movie, because we know 17 minutes of that movie were cut, full characters, like that. It seems like this poor guy, because then he lets them do what they want with his movie. And it flops.
Yeah.
So he kind of can't win.
Yeah. And some of the scenes that were cut specifically were, so when I was watching it, there's like a really, really abrupt transition that ends with them on a subway with different haircuts and different clothing. Mm-hmm. And there was apparently a whole scene where they like cut each other's hair and trade clothes. And it's sort of this like bonding moment between the two of them that kind of builds up that relationship. Yeah,
Can't
exactly.
have them bond too much in this movie, Jody.
Exactly.
You know what happens if girls go around bonding?
Oh, geez. Yeah, can't have that. So, yeah, the music is a huge part of it. Apparently, it just became more important almost to the producer than making a cohesive film.
That's such a bummer.
So one of the other producers, Bill Oakes, who supervised the music for this and Saturday Night Fever and Grease, wanted Mick Jagger to play Johnny LaGuardia. And
That's
also
funny.
considered David Bowie for the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want it to be Tim Curry. But,
yeah.
But those are interesting.
Allan Moyle, I think, was the one that insisted on it being Tim Curry. There's a quote from Oakes that said, "We brought in another editor who edited separately from Allan Moyle, and it was taking a lot of the hard edges off. It wasn't commercial enough for Stigwood, and it was probably too commercial for the director. So there was a lot of heated discussion in the editing suites, and it shows. It got lost somewhere along the way. So it was kind of a too many cooks."
Yeah. I would just love to see a movie that Allan Moyle, I guess it's Pump Up the Volume is the closest thing we've got.
I think so. I think so.
And it is, I would say, objectively, it's hard for me to say this. Objectively, I think it's the best of these three.
It feels the most like one person's vision.
Yeah.
According to Roger Ebert, Times Square is filled with ideas for a movie, but they've never just been organized into a movie. I think the other thing to mention about the music, which I kind of alluded to earlier, was that Bikini Kill's Kathleen Hanna is a big fan of this movie, and I think it did inspire, like, Nikki is definitely a prototype of like a riot girl. Apparently the LP is now, or at least as of a few years ago, was out of print and had been for years.
I wonder if this is a movie that'll get a...
It's been getting
revival.
Some... Yeah, it's been
Is
getting...
it going to be a musical?
No, it's not.
It would be a great musical,
My
actually.
God, yeah. Maybe fix the story a little bit, make it an actual lesbian story.
And then put it on fucking Broadway.
Well, it's been... so it was remastered at some point a few years ago, and once it was remastered... There was a director's commentary added. There was a little bit of a revival of interest in it. And it has been shown in the past 3 years, not infrequently, at sort of independent movie houses.
Oh, cool.
As like an event, like a screening, using the original cut of the movie, like the original 35 millimeter. The people in this movie, some of them disappeared completely afterwards.
In real life.
In real life. And some are Tim Curry.
Aw.
That's basically it. So the woman
nobody really gone on to do anything else?
So the woman who played Nikki, Robin Johnson, not much. She was in a few things after this, and she worked as a traffic reporter in Los Angeles.
Oh, weird.
From like 96 to 2003. But she's kind of disappeared. The guy who, unfortunately and sadly, the guy who played Pam's dad died of an AIDS-related illness in the 80s. I think that's one of the things that this is a time capsule of, which is New York right before the AIDS epidemic really took off. Trini Alvarado, who was Pam, has worked since quite a bit in smaller things. Her most known performance was as Meg in Little Women in the 94 movie.
Huh.
And she was in The Frighteners. So she has worked some. She's just not as... Tim Curry is obviously the most famous person from this movie.
Right.
And then the woman who played the social worker, Anna Marie Horsford, I knew immediately I'd seen her a million times before. And I figured out from where. She was in The Wayans Brothers, the TV show.
Oh.
But even before that, she was in a sitcom called Amen.
Oh, yeah.
Which I watched.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw her, I was like, oh, I know her from a million things. Yeah. But that's the main cast. Oh, yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention that I just want to come back to is the guy that runs the strip club in this movie.
Oh, yeah, the likable strip club owner
who doesn't...
a 13-year-old child in his...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And doesn't care that she's not going to be topless. Was played by Miguel Pinheiro, and he was a playwright, actor, and co-founder of the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, which
that's very cool.
Is very fucking cool.
Yeah.
I went to the Nuyorican a few times when I lived in New York. It was very fun.
That's cool.
Yeah. He's fascinating. We don't need to do a whole thing on him, but he is super interesting. Yeah. Was in prison on and off most of his life, was affiliated with the Young Lords, like wrote his first play, I think, while he was in prison.
Oh, wow.
A play that was turned into a film. Like, it also went from Riverside Church to the Public Theater to the Beaumont and was nominated for 6 Tony Awards.
Whoa.
Won a drama.
What was it called?
Short Eyes.
Huh.
It's fascinating, actually. It says when he was released from Sing Sing on parole in 1973, he was able to present Short Eyes with the Family, which is a group of formerly incarcerated. It's like a theater group of formerly incarcerated people. And it's a drama based on his experiences in prison, and portrays how a house of detention populated primarily by Black and Latino inmates is affected by the incarceration there of a white pedophile, considered the lowest form of prison life.
Right.
Like, and he's just in this movie as like the strip club owner. Yeah. He's also been in a bunch of other films in supporting roles, such as Fort Apache the Bronx, Breathless. He was in Miami Vice, the TV show, I think. In the TV series Miami Vice as a drug lord. Like, fascinating guy.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wish this movie had the foresight to populate its side characters with more like New York City, like kind of like fringe characters. Yeah, like that's really cool,
isn't it? Like that feels to me like real New York is in this movie. Like it's filmed in the city, in Times Square, on location, and there are sort of hints of what was actually going on at the time in New York. We do have some tenuous Jersey connections, other than the fact that it was filmed across the river. One that I found recently that I thought was kind of interesting, and this is a movie I actually haven't seen, but it is a Jersey movie. So the screenplay author of Times Square, who is Jacob Brackman, also wrote The King of Marvin Gardens.
Oh.
Which is a Jersey movie.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, but I know about it, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but now I'm curious.
What? I wanted to ask you before we move too far away from the Allan Moyle verse, the extended Allan Moyle, the extended Allan Moyle cinematic. What?
Yeah,
you know. Did you read anything about his movie? Well, he directed it. He didn't write it. The Gun in Betty Lou's Handbag.
I've heard of it. I know nothing though.
It is apparently a comedy farce, a screwball comedy. That. Because for a second I was like, oh, am I going to have to do a whole deep dive and just see everything he's done? And I don't know that this is one that I'll watch. It seems very silly. It's about unassuming librarian who admits to a crime she didn't commit for the attention. And it's about her, like, being behind bars. Behind bars, Betty Lou meets a variety of hardened and colorful characters. Rather than intimidate her, they actually increase her self-confidence. Once she is released, she begins to dress, speak, and act differently, and it's about like what happens when she gets caught up in all of this.
Oh, the movie poster is so funny.
Yeah, its cast is really interesting because it's Penelope Ann Miller, who has been in a million things. She's like Tony Award winning, but Adventures in Babysitting, Biloxi Blues, Big Top Pee-wee, Awakenings, Kindergarten Cop, Carlito's Way. She's done a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
But then also Julianne Moore, William Forsythe, Stanley Tucci, Catherine Keener, Meatloaf.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of star-studded, but apparently it's very silly.
Ooh, 14% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Not a great...
The British film magazine Empire gave it 3 stars out of 5, calling it "quote unquote" watchable.
I'll take watchable. Apparently it's very silly. And so I'm sort of interested to watch it. I haven't decided totally yet, but it's 1992. So in between Pump Up the Volume and Empire Records, he directed this movie.
Wow.
Yeah. So
wow.
I'm okay. Vaguely interested. It's definitely not one we're going to cover on the podcast, I don't think. But if anybody else watches it or has seen it, let us know. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I haven't even looked to see if it's one that we can
get online.
But I would bet that we could find it somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I am so fascinated by Allan Moyle, man.
Yeah, his career is...
He's like an old dude from Canada who directed... he's Canadian.
Huh. I don't know why that's interesting to me.
I know. He's from Quebec. Who has directed all of these, like, rebellious teen movies that have become these cult classics for people who grew up in the 80s and 90s. Like, how does this guy end up being this person and directing these kinds of movies? I'm so interested in his life. For Times Square, I did read that he co-wrote.
I think it's based on his story, right? But somebody else wrote the screenplay.
So he co-wrote it, and then I think, it's a little complicated, but he's given a writing credit on it, and it's based on a diary he found. Did I tell you this?
I saw this. No, but I did see this. Say more about this. This is really
okay.
This is interesting.
Let me see where I found that. I wrote it down. Here we go. It just says the movie was inspired by a diary that writer and director Allan Moyle found in a second-hand couch that he bought. The diary was from
the dream.
I know. The diary was from a young, mentally disturbed woman that featured words and drawings about her life on the streets. And he based it on that.
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
I know. I need to do more, like, Allan Moyle research. I don't know that I'm, like, desperate to watch any more of his movies, because I don't think that they're going to be of the same sort of, like, level of meaningful to me that the ones we've seen have been.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who is this man?
I don't know if what's happening now, what I'm about to do, where we've gone. This is very interesting to you and me. I now have spun out a little bit, and I'm looking at the credits for Grace Carey Bickley, who wrote The Gun in Betty Lou's Handbag.
Okay.
In 92. And then she wrote nothing until High Crimes in 2002, which is that Morgan Freeman, Ashley Judd thriller. I don't know if it was in that run of, like, Along Came a Spider and all of those kinds of movies. And then she wrote a TV movie in 2003, and then another one in 2017. And now in 2021, she wrote this. She was the executive story editor and wrote the Disney TV series Big Shot, which is a John Stamos show that I didn't even know was a thing, where he plays a temperamental college basketball coach who gets fired from his job and must take a teaching and coaching job at an elite all-girls private high school. So it's Mighty Ducks, but or Little Giants, or any one of those, but for 2021 with John Stamos. And that's what I mean. Like, how do you go from doing 3 movies 20 years ago to then a Disney Plus series star? It's so...
Yeah. It's fascinating. Okay. So should we put Times Square to bed, as Rudy Giuliani has? Fucking that guy. Ugh.
I think our Allan Moyle
what a precipitous drop in a person's reputation. This is not a political podcast, but fuck that guy. Yeah, so I'm glad we watched it. I think it was interesting. I was really thrown off by a lot of things in it, including the weird cutting and the sort of missing pieces of the story and all of that. But, you know, as somebody who grew up near New York and spent a lot of time there in the 80s and 90s, I think a lot of people say this, I'm not unique in this, but I think it was more interesting from that perspective than from, like, and what was missing from it than actually what it was. But yeah, I'm glad we watched it.
Yeah, I like this little Allan Moyle series that we did.
We are. So should we talk about what we're doing next week? Because it's also a little different.
Yeah, I think the thing that has happened sort of nicely now with us tying up Allan Moyle with a movie that neither of us had seen, but was still connected to our, like, those soul DNA movies we've been talking about, is I think we've, at least on my end, I have shown you just about every one of those movies I can think of that I think are worth talking about that you hadn't already seen.
That I hadn't already seen. Yeah.
There are definitely movies we haven't covered on this podcast because you had already seen them or I had already seen them that are really important to both of us. And we've talked about a lot of them just kind of offhandedly.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to move into a sort of kind of a new season of this off season.
We're just making up seasons as we go.
Yeah. With our next pick. And I think I have an idea for what I want to watch the week after, maybe. So what I will say is movies coming up might be ones neither of us have seen, might be ones we both have seen.
Yeah.
I think we're
going to divert a little bit from because the thing that Andrea and I realized as we were doing this post Yellow Jackets hiatus, off season, whatever, is that
we might be doing this for 10 years.
Well, there's also that, yes. But the thing that we realized that I guess should have been not a surprise to either of us is that we love a lot of the same movies. Like, even though the sort of like conceit of this is that, you know, I'm more Gen X and you're a millennial and we're about 10 years apart. And so our viewing habits are a little bit different. We do have a very similar sensibility in what we enjoy with some obvious differences, but you know, a lot of the most important movies. You're John Candy and I'm Molly Ringwald. Yeah.
Right.
But a lot of the movies that I was obsessed with growing up are also movies you were obsessed with. And so where we could do a podcast where we just sit here and like talk about how great some of those movies are, it might be more interesting for both of us, at least if we're also like looking at things at least one of us hasn't seen. So we won't have a podcast on like Real Genius anytime soon, but maybe someday.
Boy, would I love to.
I know.
That's
maybe someday,
for
just for fun. Yeah, just for fun. Yeah. What was the other one we talked about? It was Real Genius and Say Anything? Or no, there was another one that
Better
we
Off
both...
Dead.
Better Off Dead, yeah. Yeah. Those two. Oh
Better
my God.
Off Dead is a kind of, and so is Real Genius. You know, we've talked about the Molly Ringwald, John Candy spectrum being not just John Hughes movies and not just Molly Ringwald, John Candy movies. Oddly enough, those two are kind of in the middle. Those are real midpoint John Candy, Molly Ringwald movies, I think. Better Off Dead is definitely more Molly Ringwald than John Candy, and I think Real Genius might be more
John Candy
than Molly Ringwald.
Yeah.
But they both do
because there's not a lot of romance in Real Genius. I mean, there's a lot of flirting, but there's not a lot of romance.
Yeah, I do think they both trend more toward the center than a lot of the movies
That's fair.
We've
That's
watched.
fair. Yeah.
So it makes sense that we both would already love those movies.
Yeah. Yeah. So this week coming up, we are going to watch the movie Patty Cakes. Now, this is going to, I apologize to any of our non-Jersey listeners because this is a Jersey movie. Like this is, so Andrea hasn't seen it yet. I watched it about 2 weeks ago. It's
pretty recent.
It's
right?
pretty recent.
Yeah,
it was I want to say 2017, but let me confirm that. Patty Cakes. It might have been later than that. Nope, I'm right. 2017. So it is based in, it's based in my hometown, essentially. It's not really based in Saddlebrook, but it's based in the sort of triangle that is Lodi, Paramus, and like total, like that little Bergen, Passaic County borderline, which is my childhood.
You're saying that as if you're clarifying for me and our listeners, as if we're going to be like, oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
For our listeners who aren't from Jersey, Jody's saying that as if that's everybody in New Jersey is nodding along. The only people nodding along to that triangle are the people who live in that triangle.
Who
just
grew up
to
in
be
Saddlebrook
clear.
with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And I did not know that about this movie when I first turned it on. But I wanted to watch this movie because I like Bridget Everett a lot.
Yeah, she's
And
great.
we briefly mentioned Somebody Somewhere, which is the show that she was doing with Jeff Hiller, which is fantastic. 2 or 3 seasons available, I think, on Max. Fuck the streamers. We need the writers to get their due. But, have to say that.
We need a soundboard
cakes,
button that when anybody hears
I know.
a certain sound, they know
the streamers.
It's our fuck the streamers button.
We support unions. But so it is a story, a very Jersey-based story about a young female white rapper, aspiring rapper, and her sort of attempt to make a career out of that, also attempt to just kind of live with a mom who's an alcoholic. It's about her and her friends, and they're sort of like, it also does end up eventually being about the fact that she is a white rapper, which thankfully, because it is written by a white man, and so I was a little skeptical. It's not, I'm not proposing this movie because I think it's a perfect movie in any way, but I think that A, I love Bridget Everett. B, the performances in this movie are great by pretty much everyone involved. C, it takes place where I grew up. And D, it is a movie about a young woman and the power of music. And so it kind of fits with that
hitting all
theme.
Of our, yep.
It is. So I'm going to rewatch it because I did enjoy it. And I didn't realize when I first started watching it how close it was filmed to where I grew up. So I now have to go back and watch every scene for places I recognize. Any of my Saddlebrook friends that are listening to this, there's a scene that takes place at the Excelsior, which is a banquet hall on Route 46 that I had to walk past to go to school every day. So it's that. Shut up.
I said totally.
It's so specific. Anyway, so we're going to watch Patty Cakes.
It'll be fun to have an insider perspective of you as somebody who is a young white rapper. As you as somebody who grew up in the area, and then a slightly more outsider perspective as me as somebody who grew up in South Jersey, which is a totally different world. Also, for our listeners. It's a very different world.
The main character is played by Danielle McDonald, who is an Australian accent. No, she's not an Australian accent. She doesn't have one in this movie. Oh. She does a very good job of hiding it. But the other thing that she was in recently was a film called Dumplin'. Which I liked also.
I'm familiar with it. I think I've never seen it, but it's also based on a book or a series of books, I think.
I think so. Also. She was great in it. So I like her a lot. So finding this movie to watch, though, unfortunately, this is going to be one you have to pay for. So I understand if not everybody wants to watch it, but we'll just ruin it for you. So it is, even though it's relatively new, it is cheap. It's $3.99 in most places, including YouTube, Apple TV, Google Play, all that stuff, Amazon Prime. I think it's worth watching, especially if you're from North Jersey, but also if you like the types of movies we've been talking about, especially recently, that are very like about how music is life-changing and important. Like, I think that you'll relate to this also.
Yeah. So I think, we apologize for the $3.99, but
yeah,
I don't know. If you've got the $3.99 to spend on a movie, why not one that then you get to hang out with a couple of people and talk about it later?
Yeah. And it's, the guy that wrote this movie is from this area of North Jersey. We'll talk more about him. I want to do a little bit more research on him specifically, but I think it fully went under the radar.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a movie that when I heard what it was about, I was like, how did I not already know what this was?
Yeah.
So Patty Cakes, I'm pumped.
Yeah. I'm excited to watch it again. I've been thinking about it a lot since I last watched it. And I'm not sure why it's kind of stuck in my brain. It might be the performances. It might be the fact that it's so close to where I lived, but it has been something I've wanted to rewatch, and I really want to talk to you about because of other conversations we've had. Like, I've been pushing you to watch it, and now I have a way to make you watch it.
Yeah, I only do anything if it's for a podcast at this point. It's a sickness I have.
I know. So anything I need you to watch to talk about with me, I'm just going to have to propose as part of our podcast.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's true.
Yeah. So yeah, join us next week for that. Check out the movie, and that's about it.
Find us in the meantime.
Oh, great question. You can find us at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram and other places. You can send us an email at watcherspodnj@gmail.com. You can leave us a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts. We would love to hear from you, especially if you're enjoying our sort of meandering movie off-season, new season. And you can find me at Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM on Instagram.
And I'm at Andrea AQ on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us again. And we will see you next week.
Yeah, we'll see you in that little triangle of
Lodi,
the
Paramus, Lodi, and
the Bermuda Triangle of New Jersey. We'll see you there.
See you on Route 46.